The focus of this presentation is to provide a overview of behavior and the functions of behavior. So our objective for today is to develop a deeper understanding of behavior and the functions of behavior. I'm going to begin by giving you a basic overview of applied behavior analysis, and then we're going to talk through a case study example. So in the school systems, particularly the public school systems, we use documents that you may have seen in the past called functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans, or these are sometimes called behavior support plans. We use these types of documents as a way to demonstrate that as teachers, we're analyzing behavior and we're implementing effective interventions in order to meet the needs of students with behavioral challenges. These documents and the basics of these documents is rooted in the science of applied behavior analysis. So what is applied behavior analysis? ABA, or applied behavior analysis, is based upon the principles of the scientific method. As teachers, we are actually social scientists, and by using ABA, we are able to better analyze behavior and develop interventions that are applied in nature to address socially significant issues. So if you think through your science courses that you've taken either in high school or in some of the beginning science courses you've had here at Hope, you know what the scientific method is. And through the scientific method, we're able to look and see if a scientific study or intervention is working. We do the same thing with behavior. And education is a field in the social sciences. So while we don't always think of ourselves as scientists, I want you to start thinking that way, because we're going to look at cause and effect relationships related to behavior, and we're going to try to figure out how we can teach socially appropriate behaviors and look at the function of behaviors. So what is a behavior? This is very important to understand as we start to address how to teach socially appropriate behaviors and reduce challenging behaviors. So a behavior is an interaction between a person and her or his environment. And it's anything a person says, does, thinks, or feels. That is almost everything we do. We have a test called the Dead Man's Test. And the premise of this test is if a dead person can do something, then it's not a behavior. But if you think about what a dead person can do, it's not much. So let's take just a basic behavior such as breathing. A dead person cannot breathe. So breathing is a type of behavior. Let's take thinking. A dead person cannot think anymore. So thinking is a behavior. We have two types of categories in which we look at behaviors. There are overt behaviors and covert behaviors. So overt behaviors are behaviors that are readily observable. So things that other people can see. Here are some examples: writing, talking, tantruming, on-task behavior. Those are all behaviors that other people can observe. And you can collect data on those behaviors. Some are a little more difficult than others to observe and track data, but it's something that we can clearly see by watching another person. The other type of behavior we have is covert behavior. And this type of behavior is only observable to the person who's actually doing the behavior. So for example, thinking. If you're watching a student in a classroom and you put an assignment in front of them and the student is staring in a different direction other than the assignment, sometimes it's difficult for us to interpret whether the student's deep in thought about the concepts of the assignment and thinking through different answer choices, or if they're just spacing out. So that is a type of covert behavior. It's hard to observe. Paying attention during silent reading is another example. So I was a high school English teacher, and I would assign my students to read for 20 minutes at the beginning of the period. It was difficult for me to monitor whether or not a student was actually thinking about the words that were in front of them. So if a student had their book open, and if they were periodically moving their eyes and turning the pages, my guess would be that they were paying attention during reading. But it was hard for me really to measure that because that's one of those covert behaviors. Another example is comprehension of material. So if students are listening during a lecture, it's hard for me to determine if students are actually comprehending what I'm saying or if it's just going over their head or in one ear and out the other. So these behaviors are very important to us when we think about education and when we think about learning. And there are varying ways of teaching the actual doer of the behavior or the actual person to develop a way to track the behaviors and self-monitor their thinking and understanding and reading. But we will get to that at a later date. So when we think about behavior, one of the first ways to start understanding behavior and what impacts behavior is by considering what we call the ABCs of behavior. So A stands for antecedents, B stands for behavior, and C stands for consequences. Antecedents always precede a behavior, so they go before a behavior. The authors of our text note that antecedents do not have the same effect on behavior as consequences, and antecedents gain their effectiveness from consequences. So let's break down what antecedents mean a bit more. Antecedents have to do with everything that happens before the actual behavior occurs. So if we're considering on-task behavior and off-task behavior, and if a student is demonstrating frequent off-task behavior, we will want to look and see what's happening before the student gets off task. So let's take this example. Let's say I have a student named Jose, and Jose is in my English class. And when I tell Jose that it's time for him to go to the silent reading corner, select a book, and begin reading for 20 minutes, he typically demonstrates overt off-task behaviors. So what does this mean? What could it look like? Let's say that Jose starts talking to his peers, and there's a girl who he really likes, Tatiana, and he talks with Tatiana during the silent reading time instead of reading. Well, that's an overt off-task behavior. Overt, remember, it's something that I can readily see and I can observe. And my definition of off-task behavior right now is he's doing something that is not silent reading. Let's say, in addition to talking with Tatiana, he also takes out his phone and he reads different things on his phone. As a teacher from across the room, it's difficult for me to see exactly what he's doing on his phone, but I can tell that he's not reading his book and he's looking at his phone instead. So that's another overt off-task behavior in the way I'm defining off-task. So those are the challenging behaviors. He's talking to Tatiana and he's looking at his phone. The behavior that I'm desiring him to exhibit is to open a book and demonstrate that he's reading through a book of his choice. That is the on task behavior I'm looking for. So, what happens right before these challenging behaviors? That's what we as social scientists need to determine. So, right before he starts talking with Tatiana and takes out his phone, I give him a demand. I told him, I said, Jose, it's time for you to go to the silent reading station and you need to select a book and you need to begin reading. He hears the demand and then my definition of the challenging behavior occurs. He's talking with Tatiana and he's scanning his phone. Now we have to consider something else. We have to consider consequences. Consequences always follow a behavior, and consequences determine the likelihood of a behavior occurring again in the future. So they tell us if it's more likely that the behavior will increase or decrease. And the same consequence can have a different effect from person to person. So if we think about Jose, okay, the antecedent was a demand that I placed upon him. I told him he had to go to the silent reading station and he had to pick out a book and begin reading. Then the behavior that he exhibited was he chose to talk with his friend Tatiana and he chose to take out his phone and look at his phone. He did not choose to read the book. Now the consequence is going to be based upon whether or not his behavior is being reinforced or punished. Let's say that I am too busy working with other students and I don't take the time to go over and address his behavior. Okay? If I do not address his behavior, what do you think the likelihood of him exhibiting this behavior in the future will be? He'll probably continue next class to talk with his friends and to look at his phone if nothing else is put into place to make it desirable for him to read the book. We have 4 different types of consequences, and these are positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment. I'm going to break down what these mean, and I want you to think about the terms positive and negative in the way you think about math. You think about positive meaning adding and negative meaning taking away. Often in our education community, we use the terms positive to mean desirable and negative to mean undesirable. That is not what these terms mean in this case. Here's a graphic to break this down for us a bit. This is from a text called Performance Management. So positive and negative reinforcement always increase the likelihood that a behavior will occur again in the future. So if we, let's take our case with Jose. Okay, if I'm going to increase the likelihood that he is going to remain off task and talk with his friend Tatiana and look at his phone, I'm using some sort of reinforcement as a consequence because I'm going to increase that. We'll get to the type of reinforcement in just a moment. Positive and negative punishment, and punishment is also sometimes called penalty for negative punishment, they decrease the likelihood that something will occur again in the future. Okay, so now let's break down reinforcement first. So positive reinforcement means that I'm adding something to the environment to increase the likelihood that the behavior will occur again in the future. Negative reinforcement means I'm taking something away from the environment to increase the likelihood that a behavior will occur again in the future. All right, so the importance here is to note that reinforcement always increases the likelihood that a behavior will occur. Let me give you some examples of positive reinforcement first. So, if I give a child a compliment, or if I give a student a piece of candy when I'm saying, hey, great job, you did a great job today in the silent reading corner, I'm really proud of you, that's positive reinforcement. I'm adding something to the environment in an attempt to increase and to increase the likelihood a behavior will occur again in the future. Here's another example of positive reinforcement. If I pay my babysitter at the end of every session where she babysits my children, that's positive reinforcement. It's only positive reinforcement if it actually works, though. That's important to know. So if I pay my babysitter, and let's say I pay her $12 an hour after she babysits for me and my husband. And then I call her again 2 days later and I say, hey, Miss Katie, are you willing to come and babysit again? And if she says yes, that means that the payment functioned as positive reinforcement for her to say, yes, she'll babysit again in the future. Here's another example. If you, let's say you have homework to do tonight. Okay, we all have work that we have to accomplish. If you tell yourself that once you finish doing your homework, you'll be able to watch your favorite show on Netflix or Hulu, that's positive reinforcement. So once you finish your homework, then you give yourself access to a desirable activity. That's positive reinforcement because it's going to increase the likelihood that you'll complete your homework and that you'll do that again in the future in order to access that desirable activity. Now, let's talk about negative reinforcement. So, negative reinforcement is basically the removal of a negative stimulus following a response. So, here's an example from the summer. Let's say we went camping and we forgot to bring bug spray. So, we got a slew of mosquito bites on our arms and legs. If I scratch the bug bite, that removes the itch, even if it just removes it temporarily. And if it removes the itch, I'm getting rid of something that I don't like. So I'm getting rid of the itch. That is going to increase the likelihood that I'm going to scratch a bug bite again in the future. Let's think about an example related to academics. So if I'm really, really nervous about a test that I have coming up in a class, I'm probably going to study more in order to get rid of some of those nerves. So if I study more, I am avoiding the nervousness that I feel, or attempting to avoid that, and that reduces my worry. That's another example of negative reinforcement because that's going to increase the likelihood that I'm going to study for tests in the future to reduce my nervousness or anxiety about the test. All right, now let's talk about positive and negative punishment. Okay, here the terms positive and negative mean the same thing. Positive means you're adding something to the environment, and negative means you're taking something away from the environment. So here's an example. If a student comes into my class and decides to take out their cell phone and choose to use their cell phone during class rather than complete an assignment, and I shout, "No! Stop! Put that away!" in a loud voice, one, that would not be best practice as a teacher, and two, that's an example of positive punishment. Okay, I'm adding something to the environment. I'm shouting at the student. I'm kind of demeaning the student. I'm telling them to put their phone away. That's positive punishment. Let's think about a more socially appropriate example. So if a student comes into my class and is a little defiant or belligerent in my class, I may write a referral for the office and give them an office referral that then may result in a detention. So that is positive punishment. I am giving them a office referral with the intent of reducing that behavior. So the challenging behavior in this case is the belligerent or defiant behavior, and I am giving an office referral. And if that then reduces the likelihood that the student will be belligerent or defiant in my class in the future, that functions as positive punishment. Now let's talk about negative punishment or penalty. Let's say I'm teaching 10th grade English and I have a no phones rule in my class. I say you are not allowed to use your phones in unstructured ways during our class. And then I have 4 students who choose to take out their cell phones during class and use Instagram and Snapchat and different things. If I take those students' phones away from them and put them on my desk and restrict their access until the end of class, that's penalty or negative punishment. I'm taking something away. Now, if that method of taking away their phone decreases the likelihood that the students will use their phones in my class in the future, that actually functions as negative punishment or penalty. So I want to make a distinction here. A lot of times we'll say, oh, I'm using positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement or positive punishment or negative punishment. You really can't say that you're using that unless the effect is there. So unless you're increasing the likelihood a behavior is going to occur again in the future by using a strategy such as praise or giving a student a piece of candy or giving a student a ticket or something like that. And if that then results in the likelihood that that behavior will occur more frequently, that is positive reinforcement. We can't say we're just trying to use positive reinforcement. Okay? Now, when we consider behavior and the ABCs of behavior, why do we do this? We do this because we want to help students demonstrate socially appropriate behaviors in the classroom. In order to help teach students how to act in appropriate ways, specifically students who have frequent behavioral challenges, it's very important for us to determine the function of the behavior. So what's driving or causing that behavior to occur? We want to consider, what is this individual or what is this student trying to get out of this? In order to do this, we have to put on our hats as social scientists again, and we have to look at the cause and effect relationship between the environment and the behavior that's occurring. So functions and understanding functions of behaviors is very, very important because it's difficult for us to devise an effective intervention if we don't determine the function of a behavior. So the function helps us understand why the behavior is occurring. And we use data collection methods to analyze the function of behavior. Analyzing the function helps us understand what is maintaining the current behavior and what types of treatment may be effective in teaching a socially appropriate replacement behavior. I want you to remember this. So I starred this slide and I noted it as important. There are 4 main functions of behavior, or 4 reasons people demonstrate behaviors. So students may demonstrate a behavior in an effort to escape or avoid something. So they may want to avoid a task, or they may want to avoid an interaction with another person, or they may want to avoid a setting in general. Let's say they want to avoid going to the weight room, something like that. That's one function of behavior. Another function of behavior is access to tangibles or access to items. So students might demonstrate a behavior because they want to get something. Another function is attention. Students may demonstrate a behavior because they want attention from you or from their peers or their parents or maybe a certain individual who they are attracted to. Students do this for a variety of reasons, but that's another function. The last function of behavior is called sensory or automatic reinforcement. And this means that the behavior is automatically reinforcing. So it feels good. It meets an internal need that cannot be met through access to items, attention, or escape or avoidance. The most common types of functions that you're going to see in a high incidence special education program or a general education classroom are typically going to be the first three: escape or avoidance, access to tangibles or items, or attention. So let's talk through a case study to apply some of the concepts that we've been learning and to apply the antecedents, the behavior, and the consequence theories that we've been learning. So here's a case study from a high school. We're going to focus on a student named Ronnie. And here's a bit of background information about Ronnie. Ronnie is a 16-year-old freshman repeating 9th grade due to failing grades. Ronnie has a good sense of humor, and his friends think that he is hilarious. He often tries to crack jokes in class and sometimes even makes the teachers laugh. He is quite witty. He has several friends in school, and he is generally liked by most teachers, even though they have difficulty managing his behaviors. He has struggled in school throughout his entire educational career, but did not qualify for special education services due to any type of disability. His reading comprehension is at the 7th grade level, and he tested at the 8th grade level in math. Last year, his teachers indicated that he began to skip school frequently, at least 2 days per week, during the third quarter. His truancy issues made it almost impossible for him to catch up and pass his classes. The only class he attended regularly was Mr. Jackson's biology class. All right, here's the challenging behavior that Ronnie is demonstrating, or our target behavior. This year, Ronnie's off-task behavior has increased significantly over the past few weeks. His teachers were able to manage his off-task behaviors during the first quarter, but his disruptive behaviors have increased as the course content has become more difficult. He often talks and jokes with other students during both instruction and classwork. When he jokes around, he does not complete the required assignments, and he is rapidly falling behind in his classes. Additionally, he sometimes refuses to complete work and puts in his earbuds to listen to music instead of work on class assignments. About once per week, he puts his head down in his English class and he refuses to complete the classwork. So if we're going to break this down, we have a few behaviors that are occurring here. Okay, I want you to take a moment to read through this paragraph again and jot down some notes about the behaviors that you think could be challenging behaviors we may want to address. All right, so here's what I came up with. He often talks and jokes with other students during both instruction and classwork. Okay. He doesn't complete his required assignments. He sometimes puts his earbuds in to listen to music instead of working on class assignments. And he sometimes puts his head down. So we're going to read a bit more information about Ronnie, and then we're going to come back to this page and discuss what we think the behavior problem is and how we will operationally define this behavior problem or this challenging target behavior. Here's some more information related to the school classroom environment and then some previous interventions that have been tried with Ronnie. So Ronnie attends a traditional public high school in Holland, Michigan. He is repeating ninth grade due to academic failure during the previous year. His teachers are concerned that he is not motivated to succeed in school and may be at risk of dropping out if he does not pass ninth grade this year. In the past, here are the interventions that have been tried. Historically, Ronnie has been most successful in his science class, which is taught by Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson notes that he has a special connection with Ronnie. Ronnie often goes to visit Mr. Jackson between classes and before and after school. Mr. Jackson used a reinforcement system last year with Ronnie and was successful in helping Ronnie pass the ninth grade level science class. This was the only class that Ronnie passed last year. Okay, so we can see what was tried in the past, and we know that Ronnie has a special connection with Mr. Jackson, and Mr. Jackson seems to have developed a strong rapport with him. He's tried using an individualized reinforcement system that appears to have worked in addition to the special connection. And Ronnie goes to Mr. Jackson between classes and before and after school. There may be a check-in or check-out system implemented there as well. So let's look at this target behavior and the information we have here again. So we know that Ronnie talks and jokes with classmates during class instead of completing assignments. We also know that he typically doesn't complete his class assignments, and he sometimes puts in his earbuds to listen to music, or he puts his head down. So if we think about the four functions of behavior again, and the three primary behaviors, or three primary functions, I should say, that we see in a high incidence classroom and a general education classroom, we need to analyze this behavior and think, is Ronnie doing these behaviors for attention, for escape, for access to something? So it looks like when he talks, he doesn't complete his work. When he puts his earbuds in, he doesn't complete his work. And when he puts his head down, he doesn't complete his work. I think we could make the case that he's not trying to access something. It doesn't seem like he's looking for access to a particular item or activity. He may somewhat enjoy attention from his peers when he jokes around with them, but the other behaviors here, the putting in his earbuds and the putting his head down, don't seem to result in attention. It seems that the result or the consequence here is that he's getting away with not completing his work. So I think that the function of behavior for this case is likely escape. Ronnie is demonstrating these challenging behaviors, such as talking and making jokes, putting his head down, and putting in his earbuds, perhaps in an effort to escape the requirements or the demands that his teacher's placing on him to complete the work. Now, it's very important for us to understand what the function of the behavior is, because that's where we need to start in order to create an intervention that's going to be effective. We have not yet gotten to talking about what effective interventions are, but we can't get there until we pair the intervention with the function. So here, now we need to operationally define the challenging behavior so that we can pick a replacement behavior. So we could call Ronnie's behavior off-task behavior. And we could define this as talking with his peers about non-related subjects, making jokes about non-related subjects, and putting his head down. Let's say we start with that. Instead of doing that, we want to teach Ronnie how to escape the demands in a more socially appropriate way. However, our end goal is to teach Ronnie to complete the assignments and to be able to increase his academic knowledge through use of the assignments, right? But sometimes we have to start small. So if Ronnie typically is not completing any classwork, we may want to teach him how to ask for a break or how to verbalize in a socially appropriate way first that the assignment may be too difficult for him, or that the assignment is undesirable for him, or that he needs a break and he needs to be able to go and get a drink in the hallway for a moment before working on his assignment more. If we can teach him to ask for a break in a socially appropriate way, we can then hopefully curb some of this other behavior that may be impacting the learning of other students in the classroom. So for example, we can curb his joking behavior and his talking out of turn behavior, and we can curb the need for him to put his head down if we allow him to have a break when he asks in a socially appropriate way. Now we're going to get into this more in the future. Over time, we're going to want to fade that, and we're going to want to increase the likelihood that he'll stay on task during the behaviors. So what we may want to do is what we call an antecedent procedure. So instead of just giving Ronnie demands and saying, okay, Ronnie, here's what you need to do. You need to complete this worksheet. We may want to use choice-based interventions. We may want to say, okay, Ronnie, today you're going to learn about figurative language. And here are 3 different ways that you can practice your knowledge of figurative language and learn more about this. You can read this article over here and you can complete this assignment. Or let's say the option number 2 is you can read this rap song and listen to it and then talk about the figurative language that you see throughout this rap song. Or maybe the third choice could be that, Ronnie, we know you like to listen to music. Why don't you write your own song? And then you can perform it for me or for some of your peers in class. If you find things that are preferable for Ronnie, yet address the standards you need to teach him in your class, we call that an antecedent procedure. You're hopefully implementing a desirable activity that he'll be engaged in so that he doesn't have need to put his head down. He doesn't have need to put his earbuds in. He doesn't have a need to escape the task. This is just one case study, and this is the beginning of our discussion of function of behavior. I'm assigning you 2 other case studies that you're going to look at on Moodle. I want you to read through the case studies, and I want you to write down what do you think the function of behavior is, and what is the challenging behavior based on the case studies. In our next session, we're going to discuss those 2 case studies that you're doing for homework, and we're going to talk about possible ways to implement an intervention to address the challenging behaviors.